A routine traffic stop on a quiet highway quickly spirals out of control when a racist police officer decides to humiliate a millionaire woman driving a luxury car. Believing she's just another rich civilian, he abuses his power, unaware that his target is a highly trained Navy SEAL with an unmatched skill set. What starts as an act of prejudice soon turns into an unforgettable lesson in resilience as she reveals her true identity in a way no one saw coming. Don't forget to like and comment where you are from. The calm before the storm. The highway stretched endlessly under the quiet glow of the moon, the hum of engines echoing through the crisp night air, the occasional flash of headlights past, illuminating the dark stretch of road. Inside a sleek black Aston Martin, Ava Monroe drove with an effortless confidence, her fingers lightly gripping the leather steering wheel. The soft purr of the engine was the only sound accompanying her thoughts, offering a rare moment of peace after weeks of grueling negotiations and business meetings. Ava was no ordinary millionaire. Beneath the designer clothing and luxury lifestyle was a highly decorated Navy SEAL, a woman trained to endure the impossible, survive the unthinkable, and eliminate threats with surgical precision. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was simply another traveler enjoying the open road, until the flashing red and blue lights pierced the serenity of the night. "Just my luck," she muttered under her breath, signaling and smoothly pulling over to the shoulder. Her instincts, sharpened by years of combat, stirred uneasily, but she maintained a calm exterior. She had been through enough to know when something was just routine or something more. A pair of state troopers exited their cruiser, their silhouettes imposing under the harsh glare of the headlights. Officer Bradley, tall and broad with a cocky swagger, adjusted his belt as he approached. His partner, Officer Green, lingered by the passenger side, his eyes scanning the vehicle with thinly veiled curiosity. Ava rolled down her window, offering a polite but measured smile. "Good evening, officers." Bradley's eyes raked over her, then shifted to the luxurious interior of the car. "License and registration," he said, his tone clipped and impatient. Ava reached into her glove compartment, retrieving the requested documents. "Here you go," she said smoothly, watching his face as he examined them with deliberate slowness. Bradley's lip curled. "Ava Monroe. This your car?" She met his gaze without flinching. "It is." He glanced at Green, an amused smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Security consulting, huh? Must pay pretty damn well." Ava remained composed. "It does." Bradley leaned closer to the window, his eyes narrowing. "Funny, we don't see many folks like you driving cars like this through here." Ava's grip tightened subtly on the steering wheel. She knew exactly what he meant, but she refused to take the bait. "Is there a problem, officer?" Green, still circling the car like a predator eyeing prey, tapped the rear fender lightly. "You mind stepping out, ma'am? Routine inspection." Ava hesitated for a brief moment, a lifetime of tactical decisions racing through her mind. She could play along, de-escalate, or assert her rights and risk confrontation. With a slow, measured breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, standing tall despite the oppressive air radiating from the two men. Bradley took a step forward, eyes roaming over her like she was just another suspect. "Hands on the hood," he ordered, nodding toward the car. Ava's jaw clenched, but she complied, placing her palms flat against the cool surface of the vehicle. She could feel Green moving in behind her, his presence unsettlingly close. "You sure don't seem like the type to afford something like this," Green muttered under his breath, his hands lingering longer than necessary as he patted her down. "Military, huh? What did you do, logistics?" Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. "SEAL Team 6, she replied flatly. The pause that followed was palpable, the air thick with disbelief and skepticism. Bradley laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that grated against her nerves. "Yeah, right, and I'm the damn president." Green's hands grew bolder, trailing lower than necessary. "Bet you got some interesting skills, huh?" In a split second, Ava acted. Twisting sharply, she caught Green's wrist and bent it at an unnatural angle, forcing him to stumble back with a pained grunt. Before Bradley could react, she stepped in, pivoting on her heel and slamming her elbow into his ribs, sending him staggering backward. Green scrambled to recover, reaching for his belt, But Ava was faster. With precision and efficiency honed through years of combat, she swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground with a dull thud. Bradley, recovering his composure, fumbled for his taser, his face contorted in fury. "You're under arrest," he barked. Ava raised her hands in mock surrender, her eyes cold and unwavering. "For what, officer? Defending myself?" The tension in the air was suffocating. The distant hum of an approaching vehicle broke the silence, snapping Bradley back to reality. He exchanged a look with Green, who was still writhing on the ground, and it was clear they were out of their depth. Ava stepped back slowly, adjusting her jacket as if nothing had happened. "I think we're done here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Unless you'd like to explain to your superiors why you felt the need to assault an unarmed citizen." Bradley's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Get out of here," he spat. Ava didn't need to be told twice. She slid back into her car, her heart pounding but her expression unreadable. As she pulled onto the highway, she watched their silhouettes in her rearview mirror, knowing this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A line crossed the soft hum of Ava's Aston Martin, filled the cabin as she sped down the highway. But the adrenaline still coursed through her veins, making it hard to focus. Her fingers tapped lightly against the leather steering wheel, her mind replaying the last few minutes with unnerving clarity. She had faced danger in countless forms before. Hostile territories, covert missions, enemies far more skilled than two rogue cops. But there was something about this encounter that left a sour taste in her mouth. This wasn't combat. This was supposed to be home. And yet the battle had followed her here, lurking in the shadows of authority figures who abused their power. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to focus on the road. Just a little longer and she would be home. Safe. But that sense of security was short-lived. A sudden flash of headlights in her rearview mirror caught her attention. At first, she thought it was another passing vehicle, but when the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the road behind her, her gut instinct kicked in. "They're not done," she muttered under her breath, eyes narrowing. She could see the same squad car closing the distance, its siren now piercing the silence of the highway. The same officers. They were coming back for her. Ava's jaw clenched as she pulled over once again, her heartbeat steady, controlled. She refused to be intimidated. If they wanted another round, they'd get one. But this time, she wasn't going to hold back. Bradley and Green stepped out of their cruiser, their heavy boots crunching against the gravel. Ava watched them through the side mirror, noting the way they moved, predatory, angry, humiliated. This time they weren't playing around. Bradley approached first, his face twisted with barely contained rage. He rapped his knuckles against the window aggressively. "Out. Now." Ava rolled the window down halfway, meeting his gaze with a calm that only infuriated him further. "Is there a problem, officer?" Bradley's eyes darkened. "I said out of the car, now." Ava weighed her options. She could argue, demand a reason for the stop, call for backup. Hell, she had enough connections in high places to turn this whole thing into a media circus. But something told her that Bradley and Green weren't thinking about consequences anymore. They wanted payback. Slowly, she stepped out, her movements deliberate and controlled. She wasn't going to give them an excuse to escalate things further, but if they did, she was ready. Bradley took a step closer, his breath heavy with the scent of stale coffee and something more acrid. "You think you're real tough, huh? Just 'cause you got a fancy car and some attitude?" Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was a weapon all its own. Green flanked her from the side, his eyes lingering on her with an unsettling glint. "Got a little carried away back there, didn't you?" he sneered. "Women like you always think they can run their mouths without consequences." Ava's muscles tensed beneath her jacket, but her face remained impassive. "If you're looking for an apology, you won't get one," she said evenly. Bradley's jaw twitched, his anger barely restrained. "We're gonna teach you a lesson tonight," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "Ain't nobody coming to save you out here." Ava's pulse quickened, but not with fear, anticipation. She had seen this play out before. She could practically predict their next move. Bradley reached out, grabbing her wrist with a rough yank. "Hands on the car," he ordered, his grip tightening. Ava's eyes flicked to his hand, then back to his face. "Let go." He laughed, a cruel, humorless sound. "Make me." Ava's body moved before her mind even finished processing the threat. In one fluid motion, she twisted her arm free, spinning with surgical precision. Her elbow connected with Bradley's face in a swift, brutal strike, sending him stumbling back with a startled grunt. Before Green could react, Ava pivoted, grabbing his arm and wrenching it behind his back with a force that made him cry out in pain. "I told you not to touch me," she said, her voice deadly calm. Bradley, recovering from the blow, reached for his baton, his face contorted in rage. Ava's eyes locked onto his movements, years of training guiding her instincts. As he swung, she sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing his wrist and twisting it in a move so fast he barely had time to register the pain before he was face down on the hood of her car. Green struggled against her grip, but she applied just enough pressure to keep him subdued without causing permanent damage, yet. "Listen closely," Ava said, her voice like steel. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I suggest you rethink your choices before you end up regretting them for the rest of your careers." Bradley panted against the hood, his face twisted in a mixture of pain and humiliation. "You're dead," he spat through gritted teeth. Ava leaned in close. "I've faced worse threats than you in places you wouldn't last 5 minutes. She released Green abruptly, sending him stumbling backward, clutching his arm. Bradley scrambled to his feet, glaring at her with undisguised hatred. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken threats and bruised egos. Ava smirked, taking a step back toward her car. "If you're thinking about trying this again, I'd suggest bringing backup." Bradley's face burned red with fury, but he didn't move. He knew, deep down, that he had lost this battle. Ava slid back into her Aston Martin, her heart still pounding, but her expression as calm as ever. She pulled onto the highway, watching them disappear in her rearview mirror. She knew they wouldn't let this go. She knew men like them never did, and she was more than ready for whatever came next. No way back. The tires of Ava's Aston Martin sliced through the empty highway, but inside the cabin, her mind was far from calm. The lingering tension from the encounter with the officers pulsed through her veins like a slow-burning fuse. She had dealt with threats before, enemies with far more deadly intentions, but something about tonight felt different. The abuse of power, the entitlement, the sheer audacity they had to put their hands on her, it all stirred something deep inside her. Her fingers drummed against the wheel, her eyes flicking occasionally to the rearview mirror. She had left Bradley and Green humiliated, bruised and angry, but they wouldn't take it lying down. They'd be back. And this time, they wouldn't just want to intimidate her, they'd want revenge. As the city lights loomed in the distance, Ava's phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced down, recognizing the number immediately. Commander David Bear Keller, her former commanding officer and one of the few people she still trusted in her life. "Monroe," she answered, keeping her voice steady. Bear's gravelly voice came through the line, calm but laced with concern. "I heard you had a run-in with some local PD." Ava exhaled, shaking her head slightly. News traveled fast in her world. "Yeah, nothing I couldn't handle," she replied. "Just some power-tripping cops who didn't know when to quit." Bear chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "You sure about that? Because I pulled some strings and those guys, Bradley and Green, they've got a history. Complaints swept under the rug, excessive force allegations, intimidation tactics, the whole 9 yards. Ava's grip on the wheel tightened. "So, they're protected?" "Looks that way," Bear confirmed. "You need to watch your back, Monroe. These guys don't like losing and you embarrassed them badly." Ava's jaw tightened, her eyes scanning the dark road ahead. "Let them come. I'm not exactly defenseless." Bear sighed. "I know that, but you're not on a battlefield anymore. There are different rules here, ones that don't always work in your favor." Ava knew he was right, but she had never been the type to stand down. "I appreciate the concern, but I can take care of myself," she said, ending the call before Bear could argue further. Ava reached the security gate of her gated estate, the high-tech cameras scanning her face before the reinforced metal doors slid open. The property stretched for acres, a modern fortress equipped with cutting-edge surveillance and defense systems, an investment from her years in the military and private security sector. As she parked in the driveway, the events of the night continued to weigh on her. She walked through the sleek, minimalist interior of her home, her eyes scanning every inch of the space with the precision of a soldier assessing a potential threat. Old habits died hard. Pouring herself a glass of water, she stared out at the vast expanse of her property. She knew she should let it go, call a lawyer, report the incident through official channels. But deep down, she also knew that wouldn't be enough. Men like Bradley and Green thrived in the shadows of bureaucracy. They exploited weaknesses, found loopholes, and used their badges as shields. Ava wasn't about to let that happen. She picked up her phone, scrolling through a list of contacts until she found the name she was looking for: Sarah Beckett, an investigative journalist with a reputation for taking down corrupt cops. Ava hesitated for a moment, then hit the call button. "Monroe," Sarah's voice came through, sharp and alert. "It's been a while. What's going on?" "I have a story for you," Ava said, her voice firm, "but I need it handled carefully." Sarah's interest was piqued immediately. "I'm listening." Ava laid out the details, giving Sarah just enough to understand the severity of the situation. When she finished, Sarah let out a low whistle. "Sounds like you made some enemies tonight. You sure you want to go down this road?" Ava's expression hardened. "I don't see another option." "All right," Sarah said. "I'll start digging. But be careful. Guys like that, they don't play fair." Ava ended the call, leaning against the kitchen counter, her mind racing through possible scenarios. She wouldn't let herself become a victim. If they were going to come after her, they'd have to be ready for what she was bringing to the table. Hours passed, and the stillness of the night settled over her estate. Ava sat in her home office, reviewing security footage from earlier that week, keeping herself occupied, but her instincts told her something was off. A faint rustling noise outside caught her attention. She froze, her ears straining to hear beyond the hum of the house's automated systems. Someone was outside. Ava moved silently, retrieving a discreet firearm from a concealed compartment in her desk. Her footsteps were soundless as she approached the nearest window, her sharp gaze scanning the darkness beyond. And then she saw it, a shadow moving along the tree line, careful but not careful enough. Bradley and Green weren't done with her. A slow smile crept across Ava's lips. They thought they were the hunters, but they had no idea they had just walked into the lion's den. She tapped a button on her phone, activating the perimeter security drones that silently lifted from hidden stations, their cameras locking onto the intruders. Ava stepped outside, her presence calm but commanding. "You boys lost?" she called into the darkness. The shadows froze. For a moment there was silence. Then a low, angry voice. "Bradley, how you think you're smart, huh?" Ava cocked her head, stepping further into the moonlight. "Smarter than you." Green emerged from the shadows, his eyes filled with hatred. "You don't get to walk away from this." Ava took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. "I already did, but you're the ones who can't seem to let it go." Bradley clenched his fists, clearly fighting the urge to lash out. "You got lucky earlier. We weren't ready for you. But this time," Ava cut him off, her voice like steel. "This time you walked onto my property, which means I get to decide how this ends." The drones hovered closer, their presence unnoticed until Ava gestured subtly, their red targeting lights flickering across Bradley and Green's chests. Their expressions shifted from anger to unease. Ava smirked. "I suggest you leave before things get complicated." Bradley sneered but took a step back, Green following reluctantly. "This ain't over," Bradley muttered. Ava watched them retreat, her muscles coiled and ready in case they made the wrong move. Only when they disappeared into the darkness did she relax slightly, exhaling through her nose. It wasn't over. Not even close. She turned back toward the house, her mind already calculating her next move. Pushing the limits, Ava Monroe watched as the tail lights of the police cruiser disappeared into the darkness beyond the tree line, but she knew better than to think it was over. Men like Bradley and Green never walked away quietly. They would come back, stronger, angrier, and more desperate, Back inside her home, Ava paced her office, her sharp mind racing through possible next steps. She had worked too hard to build this life for herself, and she wasn't about to let a couple of corrupt cops tear it down. The last thing she wanted was to escalate things to a point of no return, but their actions tonight had crossed a line that she couldn't ignore. Her military instincts kicked in: assess, plan, execute. She needed to control the narrative. Sarah Beckett was already digging, but Ava needed more than just exposure. She needed leverage. Information was power, and she was going to gather as much of it as she could. Ava's fingers danced across the keyboard as she accessed one of her secure intelligence portals, a relic from her time in the service. Within minutes, she had unearthed more dirt on Bradley and Green than most people could gather in a year. Suspended complaints, excessive force reports buried under bureaucratic paperwork, connections to questionable figures in the department. Ava leaned back, exhaling slowly. Got you. The next morning, Ava sat in a high-end cafe downtown, a stark contrast to the events of the previous night. She sipped her black coffee, eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses, but her focus was locked on the entrance. At precisely 9 a.m., Sarah Beckett arrived, her sharp eyes scanning the room before spotting Ava. She slid into the seat across from her, setting down a leather-bound notebook and a tablet. "You look tired," Sarah said, offering a knowing smirk. Ava gave a half-smile. "Didn't get much sleep. Our friends from last night decided to pay me a visit." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "At your house?" Ava nodded. "They're not letting this go, and I'm done playing defense." She pulled a USB drive from her pocket and slid it across the table. "This is everything I could dig up on them. Complaints, falsified reports, even links to a few off-the-books operations." Sarah examined the drive thoughtfully. "This is enough to bury them, Ava. If I run with this, it's going to get messy." "Messy is fine," Ava said coldly. "They crossed the line when they tried to intimidate me on my own property." Sarah leaned back in her chair, a calculating look in her eyes. "All right, I'll start digging deeper, but be ready, they're going to push back hard." Ava smirked. "Let them try." Later that day, Ava drove to a discreet location on the outskirts of town, a rundown warehouse that served as a training facility for her private security team. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of sweat and metal filling her lungs. Her top instructor, Mike Taggart, greeted her with a knowing nod. "Heard you've been making waves, boss," he said, tossing her a pair of training gloves. Ava caught them effortlessly. "Let's just say I need to stay sharp." She hit the mats with precision, running through drills that tested her endurance and technique. The sound of fists hitting pads echoed through the space, each strike a reminder of the strength she carried. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now. As the session wrapped up, Taggart handed her a towel. "What's the next move?" Ava wiped the sweat from her brow, her expression darkening. "We let them think they're in control. Then we take everything from them." Meanwhile, Bradley and Green sat in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, nursing their drinks in tense silence. Bradley slammed his glass down, his face twisted in rage. "I don't care what it takes, we need to shut her up." Green shifted uncomfortably. "Look, man, this chick isn't normal. She's dangerous. We should back off before it gets worse." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "Back off? She made fools of us in front of everyone. Do you want the whole precinct talking about how we got handled by some rich chick?" Green hesitated, then muttered, "What's the plan?" Bradley leaned in, his voice low and filled with malice. "We make her life hell. She wants to play tough. We'll see how tough she is when we push her limits." Green swallowed hard, but he nodded. Neither of them realized how far out of their depth they truly were. The following evening, Ava was reviewing surveillance footage from her estate when an alert popped up on her security system. Motion detected at the front gate. Her heart rate remained steady as she switched the feed, expecting to see another patrol car lurking outside. Instead, she saw something worse. 3 men dressed in black were tampering with the security panel. Ava's eyes darkened. Amateurs! She activated the perimeter alarms, flooding the property with blinding spotlights and loud sirens. The men scrambled, clearly unprepared for the level of security she had in place. Grabbing her handgun, Ava moved swiftly through the house, her every step calculated. As she approached the front door, she caught sight of one of the men scaling the fence in a desperate attempt to escape. Ava stepped onto the porch, her voice cutting through the alarms. "Tell Bradley, I'm just getting started." The man froze for a second before disappearing into the night. Ava watched until they were gone, her grip on the gun tightening. By the time morning came, Ava knew she had crossed the point of no return. This wasn't just about harassment anymore, it was war. She sat in her study, phone in hand, dialing a number she hadn't used in years. When the line connected, a deep voice answered. "Ava." "Jackson," she said, "I need a favor." There was a pause, the kind that involves cleaning up a mess. Ava's lips curled into a hard smile. "Something like that." Jackson chuckled. "I'll be there in an hour." Ava hung up and leaned back in her chair, her eyes cold and calculating. Bradley and Green thought they could break her. They had no idea who they were dealing with. No more warnings. Ava sat in her study, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the oak desk, eyes fixed on the front gate's security feed. The attempted break-in had only confirmed what she already knew. Bradley and Green weren't going to stop. They had crossed the line, and now so would she. Ava's phone buzzed, and she picked it up without hesitation. "Jackson," she greeted, her voice steady, but laced with a dangerous edge. "Outside," the deep voice replied simply. Ava rose, walking toward the front door with calculated steps. As she opened it, she found Jackson Reed, former Navy SEAL and longtime ally, leaning against a black SUV. He was built like a tank, his dark eyes scanning the property with practiced efficiency. "You've been busy," Jackson said, motioning toward the security towers Ava had installed around the perimeter. "I like to be prepared," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. "And I'm going to need you to be too." Jackson followed her inside, shutting the door behind him. "Tell me what's going on." Ava led him to the study, opening a file on her tablet and sliding it across the desk. Two corrupt cops, Bradley and Green. They tried to intimidate me on the road, then escalated. They came here last night. Jackson's face darkened as he flipped through the information. "They don't know when to quit, huh?" Ava's jaw clenched. "They will soon." Jackson smirked. "So what's the play?" Ava leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "I want to hit them where it hurts. I need leverage. And I need it fast." Jackson chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "Lucky for you, digging up dirt is my specialty." Meanwhile, across town, Bradley paced his cluttered office, Green sitting on the edge of the desk, nervously biting his lip. The failed break-in had rattled them more than they wanted to admit. "She's not backing down," Green muttered, rubbing his bruised wrist. "Maybe we should walk away, man." Bradley shot him a glare. "Walk away? We're too deep in this now. That woman made fools of us and I'm not letting her get away with it." Green swallowed. "So what now?" Bradley's face twisted into a sinister grin. "We stop playing nice. If she wants a fight, she'll get one." He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. "Yeah, it's me. I need a favor. Something off the books." Green shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't protest. He knew Bradley's way of doing things, and once they were in, there was no way out. Back at Ava's estate, Jackson worked swiftly, his fingers dancing across the laptop keys as he hacked into police databases, financial records, and hidden communication logs. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the electronics. Ava stood behind him, arms crossed, watching as lines of code filled the screen. "Gotcha," Jackson muttered, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "What did you find?" Ava asked, leaning closer. Jackson tapped the screen. "Bradley's dirty, but not just your run-of-the-mill corruption. He's running an entire side business, extortion, smuggling, you name it. And Green? He's too dumb to cover his tracks. These two have skeletons in their closets that would make headlines for weeks." Ava's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Perfect. Time to use it." Jackson nodded. "We leak it?" Ava shook her head. "Not yet. First we make them sweat." She grabbed her phone and dialed Bradley's number. It rang twice before his gruff voice came through the speaker. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Bradley spat. Ava's voice was calm, controlled. "I know everything, Bradley. About your side gigs, your stolen evidence, your blackmail operations. I have it all." There was silence on the other end. "You have nothing," Bradley finally growled, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Ava smiled. "I'm giving you a choice, Bradley. Back off now or I release everything to the press, internal affairs, and the FBI. You'll be lucky to see daylight again." "You're bluffing," he shot back, but the hesitation was there. "You know me better than that," Ava said coldly. "You have until midnight." She hung up, tossing the phone onto the desk. Jackson grinned. "That should keep him busy." Ava nodded, but her expression remained serious. "They'll come back. We need to be ready." Hours later, Ava stood in the shadows of her estate's surveillance room, watching as another set of headlights approached the gate. The security system instantly identified the vehicle. It wasn't law enforcement this time. It was a blacked-out SUV. Jackson was already in position, crouched near the front entrance, his firearm held low but ready. Ava took a deep breath, her adrenaline spiking but her mind laser-focused. As the SUV slowed to a stop outside the gate, the driver's side window rolled down, revealing a man Ava didn't recognize. He was large, heavily built, with a scar running down his cheek. He scanned the estate with a calculating gaze before nodding to someone in the back seat. Ava's earpiece crackled with Jackson's voice. "Hired muscle. Your friend Bradley brought backup." Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. "Let's give them a welcome they won't forget." She pressed a button on the security panel, and in an instant, floodlights illuminated the entire property, casting long, stark shadows over the scene. The men in the SUV flinched, momentarily blinded by the sudden burst of light. Ava's voice rang out through the intercom system. "I'd turn around if I were you." The driver hesitated, clearly reconsidering their plan. Jackson smirked, stepping into view with his weapon trained on the vehicle. "Clock's ticking, boys." The SUV's engine revved, tires spinning as they backed away rapidly, disappearing into the night. Ava exhaled, glancing at Jackson. "That was just a test," Jackson nodded. "They're trying to see what they're up against. They'll be back." Ava's expression hardened. "Good. This time I won't just scare them off." The trap is set. The night was eerily quiet after the SUV disappeared into the darkness, but Ava Monroe knew better than to mistake silence for safety. She stood in the control room of her estate, staring at the security monitors with a cold intensity. Every muscle in her body was coiled with anticipation, every instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. Jackson leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his broad chest. "They're testing you," he said, his voice low but steady. "Trying to figure out if you're bluffing." Ava smirked, never taking her eyes off the screen. "Let them. They'll find out soon enough." She reached for her tablet, pulling up the extensive files she and Jackson had compiled on Bradley and Green. There was more than enough to bury them both. Evidence of illegal deals, misuse of department resources, even a few ties to known criminals. But Ava wasn't interested in sending a file to the authorities just yet. She wanted to make them feel the walls closing in. Turning to Jackson, she tapped the screen. "I need you to make sure this information ends up where it'll do the most damage." Jackson grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Consider it done. A few anonymous leaks to the right people should turn up the heat." Ava nodded. "I want them to know they have nowhere to run." Meanwhile, across town, Bradley paced inside his dimly lit apartment, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The encounter at Ava's estate had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. Green sat on the couch, his face pale and nervous. "I told you we should leave this alone, man. She's not like the others." Bradley shot him a venomous glare. "Shut up, Green. We're not backing down." He grabbed a half-empty whiskey bottle and took a long swig. "She's trying to scare us, but we'll show her what happens when you mess with the wrong people." Green swallowed hard. "We already tried. What else do we do?" Bradley smirked darkly, pulling out his phone. "We make it personal." He scrolled through his contacts and dialed a number. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Yeah?" Bradley's lips curled into a sinister grin. "Got a job for you. This one's special." Back at Ava's estate, the next day, Ava stood on her terrace, sipping a steaming cup of black coffee as the sun slowly rose over her property. The serene morning was a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the caller ID, Sarah Beckett. "Talk to me," Ava said, placing the cup down. Sarah's voice came through, laced with urgency. "Your guys, Bradley and Green? They're in deeper than we thought. Some serious connections to a syndicate that launders money through police-backed operations, and they're getting desperate." Ava's eyes narrowed. "How desperate?" "I've been hearing whispers," Sarah continued. "They might be planning something bigger. You need to be careful." Ava's jaw tightened. "Thanks for the heads up, Sarah. Keep digging. I'll handle things on my end." Hanging up, Ava turned to Jackson, who stood nearby, watching her carefully. "Looks like they're about to make their move." Jackson smirked. "Let's be ready for them." That night, Ava moved through the halls of her estate, her mind replaying every possible scenario in her head. The enhanced security measures were in place, cameras positioned at every angle, motion sensors calibrated to detect the slightest disturbance. But despite all that, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. And then it happened. The estate's security alarm blared to life, flashing red across the screens in the control room. Ava and Jackson sprinted to the monitors, eyes scanning the feed. 3 men dressed in dark tactical gear were attempting to breach the perimeter. Unlike the amateurs from before, these guys moved with trained precision. "They brought professionals this time," Jackson muttered, his expression grim. Ava's lips curled into a smirk. "Good, I was getting bored." She grabbed a tactical vest from the closet and strapped it on, moving with the confidence of a soldier ready for war. Jackson loaded his weapon. "You taking point, or am I?" Ava shot him a look. "I've got this." Stepping out into the night, she moved silently, her every step calculated. The intruders were working quickly, attempting to disable the security cameras, unaware that Ava was already closing in. She watched them from the shadows, waiting. Timing was everything. One of the men knelt to cut a wire on the fence, and in that split second, Ava moved. With lightning-fast reflexes, she grabbed him from behind, twisting his arm and forcing him to the ground before he could react. A swift strike to the temple knocked him unconscious. The other 2 spun around, weapons drawn, but Ava was already in motion. She ducked low, sweeping one of them off his feet and delivering a brutal kick to his ribs. The last man hesitated, clearly realizing he was outmatched, but it was too late. Jackson emerged from the shadows, leveling his gun at him. "Drop it." The man's gun clattered to the ground and Ava smirked. Smart choice. She knelt down, gripping the unconscious man by the collar. "Tell Bradley he's running out of options." The intruders were restrained and left at the edge of the property for the authorities to find, anonymously, of course. Ava wasn't ready to tip her hand just yet. Jackson exhaled, shaking his head. "You sure you're not having too much fun with this?" Ava grinned. Not yet. But deep down she knew things were escalating fast, and soon it would be time to end it, on her terms. Closing in, the captured intruders were gone by morning, picked up by authorities after an anonymous tip placed by Jackson. Ava stood on her balcony, watching the sun rise over her estate, but the usual sense of calm that came with the morning light was nowhere to be found. Her mind was already racing with calculations, how much time she had, what Bradley's next move would be, and how she could finally put an end to this without things spiraling further out of control. She wasn't afraid of escalation, but she was tired of playing defense. Jackson joined her, his eyes scanning the property with the precision of a man who had seen too many battlefields. "They're not done," he said, stating what Ava already knew. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "No, they're desperate now, and desperate men make mistakes." Jackson smirked. "Which is exactly what we need." Ava turned to him, a plan already forming in her mind. "We hit them first. Take away whatever leverage they think they have." Jackson nodded, knowing better than to question her instincts. "What's the play?" Across town, Bradley was furious, his fists slammed against the table in the dingy motel room he and Green were using as their temporary headquarters. The 3 hired thugs they had sent to Ava's estate had failed badly. "She made fools out of us again," Bradley spat, pacing the floor with barely contained rage. I should have known those guys were amateurs. Green, looking even more nervous than usual, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maybe it's time to cut our losses, man. She's not some rich woman we can push around. She's trained for this stuff. Bradley's glare could have melted steel. Cut our losses? No. We go all in. Green frowned. What do you mean? Bradley smirked darkly. We're not going to play games anymore. We're going to take everything from her. Money, reputation, even her freedom. Green swallowed hard. How? Bradley slid a folder across the table, filled with falsified reports, doctored evidence, and enough dirt to make Ava look like a criminal mastermind. We plant this, frame her for something big, make her the villain. Once the media gets a hold of it, her life's over. Green hesitated, his conscience gnawing at him. And if she fights back? Bradley leaned in, his eyes cold. Then we make sure she doesn't get the chance. Back at Ava's estate, Ava's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Sarah. She answered immediately. You were right, Sarah said without preamble. Bradley's getting desperate. I intercepted some chatter. He's planning to frame you. They've got falsified reports and evidence that ties you to some pretty serious stuff. Ava's expression remained calm, but a flicker of anger crossed her features. Let them try, Sarah continued. They're going to release it to the media soon. You need to get ahead of this. Ava nodded. I already have a plan. After hanging up, she turned to Jackson. It's time to expose them, publicly. If they want a war, we'll give them one they can't win. Jackson grinned. Let's make it loud. The next day, Ava arrived at a press conference she had arranged at a discreet location downtown. Journalists from major networks were already in attendance, their cameras trained on the makeshift stage where Ava was set to speak. As she stepped onto the platform, the room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, Ava began, her voice steady and commanding, I stand before you today not just as a businesswoman, but as a victim of abuse of power by law enforcement officers who believe they are above the law. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as she continued. For the past several days, I have been targeted, harassed, and threatened by officers Bradley and Green, who have a long history of corruption and abuse of power. Ava gestured to a large screen behind her, where Jackson had prepared a detailed timeline of their misdeeds, leaked documents, surveillance footage, and damning testimonials from past victims. The reporters scrambled to take notes and capture footage. These men have tried to frame me, intimidate me, and silence me, but they made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. She locked eyes with the cameras. I am here to say that I will not be silenced. I am taking legal action, and I will not rest until they are held accountable for their crimes. The room erupted in questions, but Ava held up a hand. No further comments. I'll let the evidence speak for itself. As she stepped away from the podium, Jackson grinned at her. That should stir the pot. Ava smirked. Now we wait. Back at the precinct, Bradley sat in his office, eyes glued to the news coverage of Ava's press conference. His face paled as he saw the evidence piling up against him. Green burst into the room. Bradley, Internal Affairs just called. They're opening an investigation. Bradley slammed his fist on the desk. She's ruining us. Green wiped the sweat from his brow. We have to do something fast. Bradley's eyes burned with fury. If she wants a fight, we'll give her one. That night, Ava sat in her estate, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She knew Bradley was far from finished, but this time she was in control. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. She answered cautiously. A deep voice spoke. You don't know who you're messing with, lady. Ava's lips curled into a cold smile. I know exactly who I'm messing with, and I'm not afraid of you. She hung up, placing the phone down and staring out at the horizon. It wasn't over yet, but when it was, she would make sure they regretted ever crossing her. The final move. The night was thick with tension. Ava Monroe sat in the command center of her estate, her fingers drumming lightly on the desk as she watched the security monitors. The press conference had sent shockwaves through the city, and now she was waiting for the inevitable retaliation. Jackson sat beside her, loading rounds into a magazine with mechanical precision. "They're not going to take this lying down," he muttered. Ava smirked, her eyes never leaving the screens. "I'm counting on it." And right on cue, the motion sensors flared to life. Multiple figures approached from the tree line, moving in formation. These weren't just thugs. Bradley had escalated things to a whole new level. Ava rose from her seat, cracking her knuckles. "Looks like our guests have arrived." Jackson grinned. "Shall we?" They moved in silence, slipping through the estate's shadows like ghosts. Ava's heart pounded steadily, but her mind was sharp and focused. This was no different from an operation behind enemy lines, except this time, the enemy had walked right into her trap. As the first intruder breached the outer perimeter, Ava struck. In a blur of motion, she disarmed him, flipping him onto the gravel with a bone-crushing thud. Before the others could react, Jackson took down another with a well-placed blow to the temple. Panic set in. The remaining men scrambled, but they were no match for the precision and experience of two elite operatives. Within minutes, the entire group lay incapacitated, their weapons scattered across the lawn. Ava crouched over one of the downed men, gripping his collar. "Bradley sent you, didn't he?" The man groaned, refusing to answer. Ava leaned in, her voice deadly calm. "Tell him he should have walked away." Sirens wailed in the distance. Jackson's anonymous call to the authorities had worked. The men would be picked up, and Ava made sure the scene was carefully staged to expose their illegal operation. The next morning, news of the failed attack spread like wildfire. Headlines painted Bradley and Green as the corrupt officers they were, and the leaked evidence made sure they couldn't escape justice this time. Ava stood in her living room, watching the news anchor detail the ongoing investigation. Internal Affairs had stepped in, and warrants were already being issued. Jackson walked in, holding up his phone. "Bradley and Green are done. The department's cutting ties with them, and it looks like the feds are getting involved." Ava allowed herself a small smile. "Good, but we're not done yet." She picked up her phone and made one last call to Sarah Beckett. "Sarah, time to run the full story," she said, pacing the room. "Expose everything. The people deserve to know how deep this corruption runs." Sarah's voice was filled with excitement. "On it. You just made a lot of enemies, Ava." Ava's gaze hardened. "I'm not afraid of enemies. I'm afraid of silence." Days later, Bradley and Green were arrested in broad daylight, their once smug expressions replaced with fear and humiliation as cameras captured every second of their downfall. Social media exploded with support for Ava, hailing her as a symbol of resilience and justice. The very people who once doubted her were now rallying behind her cause. As Ava scrolled through the comments, she saw messages of encouragement, people thanking her for standing up against corruption. But she knew this fight wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been silenced, intimidated, or wronged by those who abused their power. She recorded a short message and uploaded it to her social media accounts. "To everyone watching, this fight was never about me. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. If my story has inspired you, don't let it end here. Speak up, stand strong. Change starts with you." She smiled softly. "If you've made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you'd have done in my place. And if you believe in standing up against injustice, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Together we're stronger." The video started racking up views within minutes. Ava watched the numbers climb, knowing that this was only the beginning of something bigger. Jackson walked in, shaking his head with a grin. "You're not just a warrior, you're a damn movement." Ava chuckled, leaning back. "And I'm just getting started." To those who made it to the end of this story, thank you. Your support and engagement matter more than you know. If you were inspired, hit the like button and drop a comment below to share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's keep fighting for what's right, together. The content is fictitious and does not reflect reality or encourage negative behavior.